Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Diversifying Data podcast. For those of you who are listening and not watching, you should know that I am a Black woman. If you're hearing an accent, it's because I'm from Trinidad in the Caribbean, and I wear my medium length hair in locks, and my pronouns are she and her. With me today, I am very excited to have two members of our steering committee of LGBTQ+, our internal employee resource group for members of the LGBTQ+ community, as well as allies. I will leave it to them to introduce themselves. Jess, you first.
Yes, hi, my name is Jess. I use they, them pronouns, and I've been a data engineering consultant here at Kubrick for almost 5 years now. I am medium height, short brown hair, white person, and I wear glasses.
It's true. I'm looking right at them. Joe.
I'm Joe Woodman. I'm Kubrick's Commercial Analytics Manager. Also been here just shy of 5 years. My pronouns are he, him, and I describe myself as a white man with short brownish hair.
Mm-hmm. But no glasses. There you go. Okay, so let's jump in. I love Pride Month. It's gay Christmas. It's one of my most favorite times of the year. But part of the reason why I love Pride so much is because when I was growing up, in the place I grew up in the time I grew up in, being out and proud was not a thing. In fact, it never really occurred to me that I could be proud about who I was and not have to hide and lock things away until I moved here to London. I was experimenting in secret. I was frightened I was going to be found out. Everything felt really high risk, especially because I'm from a very religious family with very strong opinions about homosexuality. And being able to send the message that you can celebrate who you are, that it's important to celebrate who you are no matter who you are, is really important to me. Now, even though I say this, I keep hearing little segments of the population who go, why are we having Pride? Why do we need Pride still, right? And the reasons why people say this stuff is because they feel like, listen, the queer community, they've achieved it all. Why are they still having Pride? So some people say, look, they've achieved significant legal and social milestones. There's marriage equality now. There's anti-discrimination laws. There's societal acceptance. Why do we need Pride? Why do we need advocacy? Others argue that we don't really have overt discrimination against LGBTQ+ people anymore. That's a thing of the past. I'll pause and let that soak in, because we kind of do know that's not a thing of the past, right? But yet others believe that it's enough now. We're seeing enough representation of LGBTQ+ people in the mainstream media, in shows, in broadcasts. Oh my goodness, the rainbow is everywhere. You do not need a special month for Pride. Now, this is called the Diversifying Data podcast. So what we're actually going to do is turn to the data to answer some of this. Do we still need Pride? What does the data tell us? Can we debunk some of these naysayers and go on putting our rainbows everywhere we want to put our rainbows? So the first question I have to ask of my guest today is, do we still need Pride in your opinion? And then tell me why, bearing in mind that it's the Diversifying Data podcast, and we want to back this up with some stats and info. And I'm looking this way because I'm going to come to Jess first.
Perfect. From my perspective, so I'm a non-binary person. One of the key areas for me is healthcare. Not just access to trans healthcare, but accessing general healthcare as a trans person. So a recent study from October 2023, I think it was, showed that almost half of trans people are reluctant to access healthcare, whether that's related to their transition or just general healthcare, because they are so worried about discrimination from healthcare professionals. And again, I think it's similar in the US as well. I think it's almost a third of trans people experience the same issues. And then also, aside from that as well, just being a trans healthcare worker, over half of people have said that they have experienced discrimination by their colleagues in the workplace. So it's very, just from a personal perspective, I do find it very daunting to try and access healthcare, whether that has been related to my transition or related to other healthcare issues. There is this kind of phrase within the trans community of trans broken arm syndrome. So that is where, let's say you go to a doctor and you've broken your arm. They will just say, oh, no, it's because you're trans, you need to talk to your gender specialist about this, we can't help you. And
is that real, though? Have you experienced some of that yourself?
Yeah, from my point of view, I personally haven't. I've been very lucky, I think, in that respect. Most of my transition I've done private, which has been, for me, a lot easier, but most people can't afford to do that. It's very expensive. Yes. So luckily, for me personally, I've been fine. But yeah, I know lots of friends and also kind of from online communities, you hear all of these stories, both in the UK and the US. Everyone's experiencing the same issues.
Now, Jessie, you said that sometimes even for you it gets in the way, even though you haven't necessarily experienced negative interactions yourself. Can you share a little bit more about why you think it gets in the way for you?
Yeah, sure, yeah. And trigger warning to anyone listening, I am going to be talking about female anatomy for this next part.
All right.
So
we're ready.
Yeah, switch off if you need to. But for me personally, so it is now on my NHS records that in the NHS, you can't particularly say you're non-binary, so I've had to say that I'm a trans man.
Okay.
I'm not, but because I'm transitioning female to male, that's what goes on the record.
Okay.
That means I'm no longer invited to things like smear tests, even though I require those. I'm not invited to them anymore because the guidelines are that I don't need them. Right. So I do have to fight for the healthcare that I need. It's not as simple as receiving your letter and booking your appointment for me anymore. So that's been something that I've had issues with. Yeah.
I'm shocked that you can't say you're non-binary on the NHS.
Yeah. It's one of those things where whether this is actually true or it's a rumour that's going around, the fear is that there's a lot of gatekeeping involved in trans healthcare. And if you say you're non-binary, people will say, oh, you're just not sure whether you're a male or a female, so we're just not going to do anything for you for now until you've worked it out. And even actually private healthcare, you have to be picky with who you go with as well, because there is so much gatekeeping involved. So there are lots of hurdles. You have to be very savvy about how you get your healthcare when you're trans, unfortunately.
So what I'm hearing is it's not solved, right? So for everyone who came in thinking, no, this is fixed, it's totally not an issue, you're hearing directly from data, but also from lived experience, which is really powerful, that is still is an issue. Joseph, what you got?
I think the thing that throws me with the bit that you were talking about before is that societal acceptance piece. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of why I think Pride still needs to exist and why Pride is so important. It's true that we've made incredible strides in legality. We've made strides in acceptance broadly. Okay. Like I know that I have found coming out as a gay man much easier than, for instance, potentially somebody of my parents' generation did or my grandparents' generation. So there's a lot to celebrate.
Yes.
And I think celebration should be quite a core tenet of Pride. But at the same time, Pride Month is also about pushing the boundaries and pushing for more acceptance. There's a really terrible fact that the Trevor Project sort of came up with some data around specifically LGBTQ plus youth. And their calculations was about 45% of LGBTQ plus youth had contemplated suicide in the past year, with 14% having attempted it. Now, if you think that Pride shouldn't exist, then those numbers should be zero. And the fact that they're not very much proves that we need to be really, really conscious of driving the conversation. We need to be conscious of fighting against any prejudices that are starting to appear, and we need to keep the pressure on. And that's what I think Pride Month really drives us to do.
I totally agree with you. And I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface of the data that actually is available out there. When we were prepping for this episode, we went to the Office of National Statistics, for example, to look at some of their statistics on hate crime. And it shows that England and Wales continue to be less safe places for LGBT people. Hate crimes on the basis of sexual orientation are up by 112% in the last 5 years. Hate crimes against trans people increased by 11% year on year. And if you're looking at the last 5 years, it's 186%. And hate crimes on sexual orientation and transgender identity are the most likely hate crimes to involve violence or threats of violence. So that absolutely does not sound solved for me. And it makes you think that the work needs to continue. There's no way that we are even remotely close to where we need to be. And so when people say that to me, I always think you need to broaden out your reading. You need to find out more things, because even if you just look at the news, last year we had 2 gay men being stabbed in Clapham. And then we had another attack in Brixton within 6 days of that. So it is like a real live thing. Here at Kubrick, we have something that's called Beyond the Binary Book Club. And the last book that we read was called Transitions, or Stories of Being Trans. And it shared stories from different trans authors. And what was really interesting for me was that out of 7 stories that we read in that book, 3 of them mentioned abuse. So almost half. So are we done? We absolutely are not done. And Pride is really important to shine a light on these issues, to continue the fight, but also, like Joe said, for celebration as well. So we've talked a little bit about healthcare and a little bit about youth and a little bit about hate crimes. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about representation, because it's like you can see the gayness now. It's all around you. You want to see more. Joe, do you feel fully represented?
Absolutely not. No, similar conversation previously. There are incredible steps we've made, and I think we've made those steps because we have Pride, because we have Pride Month, because we've got that drive, because the communities come together, because we are pushing that normalization. I think every year in this Pride podcast, I push Heartstopper, which is a phenomenal TV show on Netflix. If you haven't seen it,
I was just waiting for it.
But there are huge numbers of TV shows that are doing a better job at showing representation, and not just specific queer specific shows, but also shows more broadly that are trying to normalize same-sex relationships, trying to normalize the LGBTQ plus community. But there are definitely areas that we don't have representation and we don't have that drive. There was a really interesting piece of research done by Stonewall and some of their supporting networks around representation in sport. And specifically, I think the stat was that 7 in 10 sports fans who've attended a match have either heard or witnessed homophobic abuse. 7 in 10, 70%. There are 3 in 5 fans believe that anti-gay abuse from fans dissuades professional sports people from coming out. And in fact, there are very few professional sports people, especially in the world of football, who are out and proud, where statistically it's incredibly likely that individuals are really having to keep themselves and not really express who they truly are just because of that abuse, whether that's from the fans, whether it's internally, whether it's just from that wider societal acceptance, which we were talking about before. So from a representation piece, we've made strides. We're making progress in that space, but there are definitely areas of society that we're leagues behind where we need to be.
Sometimes I think I would love to see a show that isn't about being queer or being gay or anything like that, that just has characters that are gay, are queer, living their best lives. Because like sometimes when we get it, it's stories of hardship or like their tough journey or like we're supposed to learn something about it. But for me, sometimes what's missing is stories of gay people just living and thriving. And is it fully representative if that piece of the puzzle is missing? I don't know. Jess, do you feel represented?
Short answer is no. From my perspective, it feels like a lot of the representation on screen is from the sexual orientation point of view. I very rarely see any trans people, characters, storylines in any mainstream media, really. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is Sex Education. In the final series, they had trans characters. Apart from that, I very rarely see myself represented at all. And also, back to your point about sport as well, trans people are being progressively blocked from participating in not just professional sports, but also at like a school level as well. And I think in terms of kind of a celebratory point, women's football is fantastic at that. There's so much representation, particularly from a sexual orientation point of view, but also they had a non-binary player playing in the World Cup last year for Canada, which was fantastic to see, and I loved that. But I think there's a long way to go.
We need more, for sure. I think we need more as well. For me, it's that intersectionality piece as well. So listen, when the new Doctor Who was announced, I was so excited, because I don't think people always appreciate the additional level of stigma that comes from being a minoritized ethnic group and queer. It is layered and nuanced, and to see Nkuti Gatwa on screen as Doctor Who and people loving it. So like in the beginning, there was some hateration, but then people have embraced him as the Doctor. He's getting really good feedback. Like, it's so meaningful, and the story doesn't have anything to do about it. It's Doctor Who, and that's the kind of thing that I mean when I say representation, just because it's there. And I think some of the ways that we program also lead to misinformation, because there are people going around thinking all trans people are drag queens, because when they see them, it's mostly on RuPaul's Drag Race, right? And other shows like that. It's about that general level of representation, and we aren't there until, everyone is there. So we started off the episode by saying some people think we don't need pride anymore. And the reasons were, look, there's anti-discrimination laws. Nothing is happening. We've debunked that. Then we talked about things like healthcare, and so equality is not quite there. So we've debunked that. We also mentioned the point about representation. We have debunked that with data and personal experiences. I think we are overarchingly agreeing that we still need pride, that pride should totally be a thing. So my next question is, why is pride important to you specifically? Why is it meaningful and important for you? But then also, what are some of the things that you do to celebrate?
Yeah, so for me, I only came out very late, a couple of years ago I came out. So last year was my first Pride, which was a very big moment for me. I think before I kind of realised I was trans or realised I was queer, I was probably similar to other allies. I was like, yeah, go you, but it's not for me. I'll support from the sidelines, but that's it. And I didn't really understand how much of a fight there still was for equality. Now that I'm in it, celebrating last year, I went to Manchester Pride, fantastic. And I felt for the first time that sense of community and everyone being there together. And there was so much love in that space. And so I think that's, on the one hand, what Pride means to me is that feeling of community and celebrating that. But on the other side, particularly with Trans Pride coming up next month, that's where, the protests are happening and where we've still got a lot of work left to do. So I think it's acknowledging both sides.
Yeah, I agree. And are you planning to do any marching this year?
I am hoping to go to Trans Pride next month, yes.
Amazing. That's incredible. And I don't think even people who maybe haven't been to a Pride march, as an example, realize that even while you're in the middle of it and trying to celebrate, there are people protesting you on the sidelines of the march where you're trying to celebrate. Last year, for the very first time, Kubrick marched in Pride in London, and there were various points along that where there were protesters, and we are told very clearly, don't engage with the protesters, and they're there on the day. But I mean, we did blow our whistles and horns and drown them out for a large portion of that. But it just goes to show that even in events that are supposed to be about celebrating who we are, those things creep in. So are we all the way there? Maybe not. And I think in the coverage of what you see of Pride, you see happy people dancing in the street, and you don't see as much of the other stuff that tells you that there is still work to be done. So, Joe, why is Pride important to you?
For me, very much like Jess, Pride is about community. And it's the one time, we all live very busy lives, and we have our own sort of friendship groups and work colleagues and families that I feel spends a lot of my time sort of navigating those communities and those spaces. But it's lovely to take a step back during Pride Month and feel part of the wider LGBTQ plus community, whether that's engaging with like old, long lost friends, going to Pride events, going to book clubs, making a point to go and like support your local queer cinema, or like push the envelope out and go to a drag show, or go to any number of these kind of things. It's a lovely excuse to really feel yourself in that community, because otherwise work and life and everything sort of gets in the way, and it's a lovely thing to step back. For me, I mean, walking in the Pride Parade last year was phenomenal. I'm hoping to walk in one this year as well. But even then, going to these Pride events and feeling that community spirit is incredibly valuable and incredibly, incredibly enjoyable. The other thing I try and do in Pride is, in trying to feel myself as part of that wider community, is doing research, doing reading, doing all of that kind of stuff. Because, and as I said right at the start, we've made incredible strides for Pride, specifically in the UK and in the Western world. That is not the case in a lot of other areas. And so even though we've got more steps to take on our side, they've got even more on different areas. And so in 2020, the ILGA World did a review of how many countries it's still illegal to be LGBTQ+. And at that point, I think it was 70. It's a huge proportion of the world, and so there's a huge proportion of voices who are in these communities where it is illegal to have that voice. And so one of the drives I try and do during Pride Month is to find those voices and to read their stories and to read their experiences, to really understand and brought myself back into, which is the point of this whole thing, the importance of Pride Month, the importance of community, the importance of sort of coming together.
I agree. I started off saying why Pride is important to me. It still continues to be important to me for that reason. If I am marching or going out anywhere, I'm taking a Trinidadian flag with me so that anyone who's watching knows, hey, look, I'm not the only one. And I think that's really important. For me, Pride is also like my personal grassroots mission to broaden the minds of my friends and family. I am on Insta like every day, posting the gayness, the stats from an educational perspective, the achievements, the celebration, because sometimes, as we look at the journey and all of the things that we have to achieve, it seems really daunting. But if we could all make a change in our small area of the world, then over time we could create a place where maybe there's less protesters or no protesters, and where we actually come closer to this ideal of equality where we really aren't there right now. So for all of those reasons, super important to me as well. So my final question to you both is this. What is the one thing that you would like people to take away from this episode of the podcast?
So I think the main thing for me to take away is, yes, let's celebrate Pride. It's a great month. Let's have fun. But the fight isn't over. There's still a lot of conversations to be had, and the data we've talked about today has proven that. So for me, if you feel safe to do so, let's keep having those conversations, and let's keep striving for a better future.
I love that. Over to you, Joe.
I sort of echo what Jess has said. I think the last mile is always the hardest, and I think there is a risk that by celebrating our successes, we hide the steps that we've got left to go. And so, very much agreeing with Jess there. Like the drive should be to celebrate, but it should also be to focus and to learn and to engage and to bring people into the fold and to try and crack open and deal with the final areas where prejudice is rife, where challenges occur for LGBTQ plus individuals, and to make the societal change that we need. Legal change is difficult enough,
yes,
but societal change is a whole different area. And we're on that journey. And I think, what I was saying right at the start, it was so much easier for me to come out than it was for my parents' generation, which is much easier for them than my grandparents' generation. I'd love for my nephew's generation for it to be incredibly easy and or not required.
Not required. Love that. Okay, thank you to both of our guests, Jess and Joe, for their incredible insights. And thank you to you for joining us on this look at the data behind Pride and for listening to this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that it made you really think about and consider Pride and how you might want to celebrate it differently this year. On another note, we would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the episode, but also tell us what data trends that you'd love us to cover. What hot topics should we be tackling on this podcast? If you have a story to tell yourself, or if you have any tips or suggestions, please email diversity@kubrickgroup.com. That's diversity@kubrickgroup.com. Thank you, everyone.